Seahawks have some big decisions to make late April. Joining us now, ESPN draft analyst Jordan Reed on the Emerald Queen Casino Sportsbook Hotline. Jordan, how's it going?
It's great. Thank you all for having me.
We're happy to have you on here. The Seahawks are in a really interesting spot where they've got like an older quarterback with Geno who they're clearly confident in, but everyone's wondering if they're going to be taking a quarterback in the first round. Both Bump and I think that's probably not going to be happening. But tell me a bit about this quarterback class after you get past the top 3 or 4. I can't tell where Bo Nix and Michael Penix are going to fall.
Yeah, it just depends on who you ask, honestly, with this quarterback class. And everybody knows about Caleb Williams of USC, Drake May of North Carolina, and then also J.D. Daniels of LSU. But this second tier is really, really interesting, talking about J.J. McCarthy of Michigan, Bo Nix of Oregon, who you just mentioned, and also Michael Penix Jr. of Washington. And depending on who you ask, there's a different range of where those quarterbacks are projected to go right now with McCarthy. Some people are saying that he can go inside the top 5, while there are some others that feel more comfortable with him in the mid to late first round. Bo Nix is in a similar situation of where there's some people that are comfortable taking him in the first round, while there's others that think he's a day 2 guy, and Penix is in that same realm as well. And then after that, you're getting into guys like Spencer Rattler of South Carolina, who had a very good pro day. I was there in attendance. I thought he threw the ball very well. Michael Pratt of Tulane, and then also Jordan Travis of Florida State.
Jordan, I worked for the Pac-12 Network. I've followed Bo Nix and Michael Penix, so I know them pretty well. So obviously I'm a bit biased here, but I look at Michael Penix and what he did in college and how he performed at the combine when it comes to throwing the football, and it just baffles me that he's not moving up on a lot of people's draft board. How much does the injury history have to do with that, or do you feel like the top-tier quarterbacks or considered top-tier quarterbacks are that much better than Michael Penix?
It's a combination of those two variables, honestly, with the injury situation. 4 season-ending injuries in as many seasons prior to his time at Washington. But I will say this, we have to give him credit for staying healthy over the course of the past 2 seasons and also playing very well. So depending on who you ask, once again, with the medical situation with Michael Penix, that is going to be something that does probably keep him off of some teams' boards, just because when you're talking about investing in such an important position, they're going to want mostly a clean injury history with those players. And then with Penix, he doesn't have that. And then also the mobility factor or lack thereof with Penix. When we saw it in the Michigan game, in the title game, of where when you force him off of the spots, he does have some troubles when he's forced to move outside the pocket. So just an interesting stat about Penix. He's really good inside the pocket. So when his feet are set, he has a 69% completion percentage, but when he's forced to move off the spots or shuffle off the spots, it drops all the way down to 43%. So there is a pattern there as far as with his lack of mobility or when he is moved off of his original launch points. So it is the injury history and then a combination of the mobility or lack thereof with Penix of why he's not viewed in that first tier with the other guys right now.
Hey, with Georgia tight end Brock Bowers, I saw one mock that had him to Seattle at 16, but I've also seen him as high as number 5. I mean, you wrote, Jordan, that the Chargers are the most interesting team to you right there, wondering what they could do. I mean, they could take him, which seems crazy, but they could. Where does your gut tell you that Brock kind of lands?
I think it could be possible with the Chargers at 5, but I think they would feel a little bit more comfortable trading back, just because when you're talking about tight ends, and we've seen a pattern of them go very early in the draft, and it doesn't have good history as far as them getting involved in the offense very early on and having success early on in their careers. And we've seen Kyle Pitts, that's another great example of a player that his career got off to a really fast start, but he has kind of struggled of late just because they haven't been able to involve him in the offense. So just how heavily involved is Brock going to be in the offense, and do you feel comfortable taking a tight end that early? That's what it's going to come down to with him. But I look at the Chargers at 5, the Jets at 10, make a lot of sense as well, and even Cincinnati in the mid-first round as well. So there's a lot of teams that make a little bit more sense for Brock Bowers before potentially the Seahawks to consider him at 16.
Jordan, I've been fascinated with the tight end position and how it's changed over the last decade, just the things these guys are able to do. And as I watch film and I start looking at linebackers, because obviously over here in Seattle, they needed some backer help. I look at these linebackers and I'm seeing a change in their body types and what they're able to do. Do you see that when it comes to watching film on these linebackers? And also, what do you think about this linebacker class in the 2024 draft?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're spot on. Long gone are those days of those big, tough Mike linebackers that are just downhill, what I like to call sledgehammers, just because the game has changed. The game has evolved. It's more of a passing league now, and you have to be a versatile coverage linebacker. If you can't play in coverage, these offensive coordinators and offenses are so smart now to where they can scheme specific concepts around you to where they can take advantage of you. So what you're seeing now is defenses have adjusted to where they want lighter personnel or lighter players in those lighter type of personnel packages to where they don't have to take that guy off of the field. So a lot of teams are playing with mostly two linebackers. So they're playing with a Mike and a Will or a Mike and a Sam, however you want to classify it. But what's happening now is people would prefer what's called a modern day linebacker, of where they're a little bit lighter, 230, 235 pounds, that are versatile. They can come downhill and strike, but also they can sustain and feel comfortable in pass coverage too. But this linebacker class overall, I think it's one of the more weaker linebacker classes that we have had in recent memories. The only one that I feel comfortable about going in the first round potentially is Edgerrin Cooper of Texas A&M. But there is quite a few guys that could go on day two. Junior Colson of Michigan has some fans in the league. Peyton Wilson of NC State is another name that you hear about a lot. Cedric Gray of North Carolina. And then Jeremiah Trotter Jr. of Clemson is another name that you hear about quite a bit. So there isn't that bona fide guy like we have seen in years past. There's no Roquan Smith or nobody like that in this draft class, but there is some value on day two and day three.
Hey, curious about the trenches. The Seahawks conversation all offseason has been that they need to build there. They are one of the worst run defenses in football. They've never been like a top 10 offensive line when Pete Carroll was here. I mean, really, that's where they need a lot of focus. How would you say the depth or strength of the classes at interior offensive line and at defensive line?
Well, interior offensive line, I think there's some value on day two, then especially day three as well. Now, offensive tackle, I think that's one of the stronger overall positional groups in this entire draft class. But just particularly speaking about guard and center, there's some really good centers in this draft class. Jackson Powers Johnson of Oregon is one name that you'll hear quite a bit. Graham Barton of Duke, who I have as a center. Then also Zach Frazier of West Virginia. But moving over to guard, there's a lot of either or with some of these players. And what I mean by that is there's some people that believe some of these guys can be a tackle or they can be a guard. Troy Fautanu of Washington is one name that I would have circled if I was Seahawks fans. I would feel comfortable with taking him at 16 just because I think he has that guard tackle flexibility that I think he could come in and be a day one starter. But there's a lot of other guys that you hear about in this class. Christian Haynes of UConn, Zach Zenser of Michigan, Cooper Beebe of Kansas State, just running down the list of some names that you hear about quite a bit in this guard class.
I love me some wide receiver play. And when you look at the top four receivers that I always mention in this draft, obviously you go Harrison, Neighbors, Adunze, you got Thomas as well. You know those guys are going to play in this league, but you can find some good receivers in the draft, especially late. You look at the Pittsburgh Steelers that have done a great job drafting receivers over the past years. Are there any guys that maybe the average fan doesn't know about when it comes to the wide receiver spot that you feel will make a roster and contribute early?
Yeah, this is a really strong wide receiver class. And just to give you guys a peek behind the curtain of my draft board, I have 12 day two grades for wide receivers. So that just goes to show you the depth in this wide receiver class. But two guys I think could definitely be value on day two is Ladd McConkey of Georgia. He's one that I had an opportunity to see at Georgia's Pro Day last week. I thought he looked very good there. Xavier Legette of South Carolina is another name. And then Jalen Polk of Washington. I think he's a very underrated name that isn't getting a lot of love right now, but I think he can be a very good wide receiver too on the next level.
Sticking with